everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is really overdue because we are going back to this little number here. Well, for those of you who might remember it because they already followed the channel last year, is when I started a series with this painting in order to illustrate different types of techniques. So we started out with the technique of the imprimatura or the underpainting. Then we, I believe, laid down the first layer of colors together. Then there was one video dedicated to how to paint a detailed tartan, so fabric basically. Oh no, I believe that there was maybe one about how to paint grasses. See, it's been so long I can't even remember what we've done together with this. Then there was one how to paint realistic looking tartan and fabric and things like that. And I actually planned on doing two more. So one where we would paint a realistic looking road together, because there are quite a few pebbles and stones laying in the foreground, and yeah, it is quite a big chunk of this painting, so I believe it is important to have this right. And then the last one, in my mind at least, would have been how to tie everything together in this painting, because the temptation is, as you go forward, like finishing up different sections or areas on the canvas, and then be satisfied with how each part of it turns out, but at the end of the day, with some distance from the painting, like both physical distance, going a bit away from it, and the distance of time. Let's say if you let it sit there on your easel and dry down for a couple of weeks, you come back and you have the feeling that something feels out of place, something isn't right, because every part of the painting is somehow living its life on its own and it's not working together. So I believe that this stage of the painting is very frequently overlooked, and it is quite decisive, because you have to make it work together like in an orchestra, and every instrument have to pay attention to what the other players are doing. And it is definitely the same with oil paintings. So you have to have some finishing touches at the end to bring it all together. So these are the two videos that I planned on doing and that I somehow never ended up doing. So yeah, I would like to finish these before the end of the year. This is this year's resolution. So today's video will be dedicated to how we paint a realistic looking road. Once again, for those of you who are here for a while, you would know that videos from this series are longer, like really long. They're into 1 hour or something, because I will paint in real time and comment on what I'm doing. The idea behind it would be that it really is an in-depth tutorial of how to do things, and also to give you a look into how I do things, what my methodology is. So yeah, if you find it too strenuous, or if it's not the type of video that you are looking for, I'm sorry that this week's video will be maybe not your cup of tea. We will be back to quicker videos as well, and to art talks, and yeah, time lapses as well, but I really still want to finish up this series. So for those of you who would like to stay here and bear with me, thank you so very much already beforehand. Yeah, let's jump into today's session, shall we? Now, I thought about this hard and long on how to best start out doing this part, because it can be really tricky. It's very detailed and at the same time very monotonous, because you are more or less painting the same thing over and over again. These are stones lying around, bits of rocks on a road that is not, you know, maintained really that much in the Scottish Highlands, so it has to look rough. It has to look realistic, because it is once again not only the foreground trailing off into the background, but it is also quite a bit chunk, like space-wise, of the painting. So if it looks off, it will make the whole painting look off, even if every other bit of it looks fine. So you have to be organized about it, in my opinion. So what I thought would save us some time would be laying out the colors that we are using beforehand on the easel. And I do feel like this will be a very limited color palette, because we have more or less dark and middle browns. We have a bit of black, obviously, in order to make those shadows happen, and some highlights, but these are the same type of rock basically. So we will just have some variations in color value, but not that much in color tone. Maybe a bit, not a lot. So I would start out with having the base color on the palette, then the color for the highlights and for the shadows, and then maybe one, maximum two other colors in order to vary the hues a little bit and create a bit of depth, but not an awful lot. We do not need to have like 10 different browns. I do believe that we can make it work with maybe one or two other colors for hue. And this way I can basically use a very limited number of brushes as well and go back and forth between the different colors. And as for the rest of it, I will talk you through as I go along. So let's jump into it. Okay, let's see what type of colors we will need. As previously stated, I believe that there is one like overall base color that we're going to use most, which has a reddish undertone, and this is why I personally would go for either the Sennelier Brown, which might not be sufficiently reddish in undertone. I am looking for my trusty Burnt Sienna. This is what I would probably go for. There you go. Can I squeeze out some more maybe? Okay, there we go. Perfect. Now we put the Sennelier Brown close by, because I believe that we will be using those two a lot together. There we go. So we have those main tones basically for what we need to do. And now what I see is basically a greenish undertone, green-gray, when the path trails off into the distance. And I would use, I'm debating two options here. I'm debating the cool gray, which will definitely be too blue in order to do what we need to do, but I will still give us the option to, you know, add it in small doses, shall we need it later on in the process. And there you have it. We don't put on quite as much, just a little bit, in order to give us the option of a cooler undertone. But mostly I believe what I would go for, brown ochre, this is what I wanted. It has this greenish undertone, which we will definitely need for quite a bit of the path. So this is good. And then we need something of a lighter beigey color for the highlights, and once again we will go for the warm gray here. I mean, these are very much the workhorses of my color palette. These are the colors that for some reason I often find in all of my paintings. I don't know, I keep circling back to those because they do make sense for me. And this leaves us with these colors, so Burnt Sienna here, Sennelier Brown, Brown Ochre, cool grey and warm grey here. I've pulled out a bit of black here as well, ivory black, but I believe this is really all we will need to complete this part of the painting. Okay, here we are. I've thought long and hard about where to start with this, because it is an extremely detailed painting, and especially an extremely detailed part of this painting is this rocky path. So there are different ways that you could go about it, I believe. You could start with the color that is most frequently found in the rocks, then start with another color that you see quite a lot on the path and lay this down, and so on and so forth until everything takes shape. I think this would be a bit fluffy, although it would definitely lead you to the same result. But I don't like working partially and filling in only one bit of an area at a time. I know that quite a few painters like to start on a bit of a painting, bringing this to perfection and then continuing to another area of the painting. I like to lay down the bases throughout the whole thing and then construct it layer by layer. This is how I personally work. So this is also why I believe my weapon of choice, if I may say so, in this particular situation will be taking up a very fine thin brush with the darkest shade of brown, maybe mixed in with a bit of black, in order to lay down the forms of the different stones. Because what I find is, and I will of course include the screenshot of the original photograph in the video so that you can see for yourself, is that every stone has a black outline, more or less. It is more or less visible, it is more or less dark, but every single rock has it. This is maybe what they all have in common. So what I would do is I would basically draw in all the stones on the path so that I have a pattern, so that every stone has a shadow and an outline, right? And only then, once I have the whole pattern on the path, will I go in with the different colors to fill in the stones and to fill in the highlights or the body of the stone within this black outline or within the black shadow. I believe this is what will be the easiest for me personally in my way of working through a painting. This will be very repetitive work. I believe what I will do is, for this part of the painting, I will just make a time lapse out of it so that it won't eat up a lot of our time together. Right, and this is how I personally would start to create texture, because the issue of this first step is exactly that, is to create texture, the underlying texture for the rocky road, before you go into the detail of painting in every single stone. What I might mention here are two things. First of all, you have probably seen me use a small round brush. I switched between these two. Let the camera take a minute to focus. So the Raphael Sepia Deco in size 0 and 6 over the 0, so it's an even smaller one. As you might have seen, these are both quite used brushes. So these are bent, they are really beaten up, those brushes, and this was a very deliberate choice because I wanted to have a line that is not pristine. I wanted to have something quite diffuse and a line that is nearly unpredictable in the way that I would move the brush, because I need something that is as spontaneous and as chaotic as is nature. You cannot have something very geometric, very organized here. This is not how, in my opinion, this painting or this part of the painting should feel. the rocks are thrown about on the road through the different vehicles that are moving on it or people that are walking on it. So there's really no organization to the way that the stones are laid out. This is not specifically made by a human hand, but through movement, through time, through weather conditions and stuff like that. So there's something very spontaneous and something very disorganized about it, and I wanted the brushstroke to reflect that. So as you can see, the line has no sharp edges, it is a bit smudged out. I was not at all structured with the amount of medium that I put on my brush. Between each brush stroke it was never really the same, so there are areas where we have some heavier paint, areas where the paint is really very much thinned out. This gives me a base that is not homogeneous, a base that is a bit chaotic to paint on and to create a chaotic canvas of this rocky road. For me, it is never about copying the photographs that my paintings are based on, but reinterpreting them in another medium. You will not see me reproduce it with minutiae, with the intention of being photorealistic. I would aim for the key areas of the painting to be as close to something very believable, something very realistic, but never a carbon copy of the photograph. So I have no intention in actually drawing in the stones in the exact same way as they appear in the photograph. This is not what I'm going for, me personally, with this painting. I just want to reproduce the look and feel, the overall perception that you get from the photograph, the way that you see the weather conditions, you know, how it is misty, how the stones will be a bit glistening, how wet the air is, how barren the land at this time of the year. So this is what I want the painting to reflect first and foremost, and not at all the exact pattern of the stones on the road. And this is also why I wanted to be carried a bit by my brushes without thinking about it too much, and creating a pattern that gives the road a bit of a form, a bit of movement, you know, going into the distance without being limited by or bound by the initial photograph. Now we can maybe move in, or starting to move in, into some key colors in the stones that we find in the photograph, and mark those stones out on the way, because this will then give us a guide, a visual guide through the path, and we would know where everything else would go in relation to those stones that are a key moment in this path. Now, upon reflection regarding my color palette, what I was maybe lacking are the shades of ochre in the stones. So I just added Italian earth to my palette, and the brush that I will use for this filling in of the different stones is this one. It's a round brush once again. As you can see, the inscription is completely went away with time. So the only thing that I can see is that it's synthetic hair, but I could have told you that. Heavy body paint, 860. I have no clue as to the brand of this brush, but I believe this is not really important. The important thing is the form of the brush. This may be of interest to you, what I use, and then you can find alternatives in other brands and it will work out fine as well. So now I've mixed in a bit of the Italian earth with the Sennelier brown, and let's start filling in those stones. So for me, this one is a cornerstone, and I will go over the line a little bit because we don't have any shadows in there. Now we have one that's a bit lost in the middle here, and we have quite an orange one here. We have 2 smaller ones. Then we have a few scattered around here that we can fill in. And once again, I'm more so following the drawing of the outlines of the stones that I did on the canvas rather than following the photograph. I'm combining both of them a little bit. Like, I know that on the photograph this is where the stone is and I've painted it in around here. Is it exactly the same placement? I'm not sure, but you know, I'm comparing what I've drawn with the photograph, and I'm placing the stones accordingly. Now we have filled in those stones in here. We have one brighter one in there and here. Some general more orange area somewhere in here. And this will be more of a grey area, so we don't have those reddish or ochre colored stones where they are mostly here in the foreground. This is where they are scattered mostly. We have some smaller ones in here, and then they are here, here. Also, one caveat, this is the first time of me actually filming in my new studio, so I struggle a little bit with the new setup. For one, I have a window that is facing the door, so I have to factor in the daylight, and I do not have a lot of space to place the camera according to the lenses that I have. So, long story short, I really apologize in advance if the setup is not the very best and that there are parts of what I do that you cannot make out very well. Unfortunately, I will only be able to see how this looks on camera once I've done some editing. So once I've basically finished filming, which is not great, I grant you that, but I cannot put off finishing this painting any longer. I wanted to share the process, and I'm simply hoping for the best, namely that you can make out what I'm doing without having to, you know, it would be ridiculous to paint over the painting in order to refilm everything because I haven't set up the camera right. I hope you agree with me. I'm not a content creator, I'm just a painter who is taking you on a journey of how I do stuff and hoping that you find it interesting, but I will not redo a painting for it to look exactly right on film. So I just pray that everything I do is more or less visible, and otherwise I'll just check out the video and it will never see the light of day again. I believe that I'm done with this color here, so we can now switch over to something different. Maybe I will now go over to some greenish grays. So this is where I pick up a little brown ochre. I use the same brush, by the way, so I've just brushed off the rest of paint, taken up some different paint, and on we go. So once again here we're trying to create texture because we cannot make out at that distance in a very detailed way what the stones are doing. So we basically just want to have some movement and the suggestion of chaos and stones in the distance without going into any further details. I believe this is where we have another bit of those greenish greys here as well. And maybe we need to go a bit lighter with this color, or at least create a variation on it where we have a lighter version of it. And then go over the bits here. Once again, I'm not laying down the paint in a very opaque way, right? I want it to look scruffy and semi-opaque so that you cannot really make out which color it is, what lies underneath. It is a bit messy and textured and not at all organized in that way. I'm smudging out also a lot of what I've previously did in order to have the color mixing in together. I might need to re-establish the outlines of the stones again at some point. I'm not sure yet, but I think I will need to go over again. And there you go. And these are the lightest stones here. I also try to turn the brush in different directions in order to be unpredictable in the brush strokes and create variety that you so often find in nature. Nature is never repetitive in that way, so we need to imitate it as best as we can. There are some bits that are clearer in here in the foreground, but we need to smudge it out because the previous color was pretty good as a base. Another quite clear stone here, one little one here, some of the highlights in the stone here. Here, accentuate the lighter parts of the path here. Sometimes also squinting your eyes a little bit can help to make out a pattern, a color pattern in the photograph and the painting, because you're forcing your eyes to be less focused on individual details and trying to capture an overall impression of color. This is what I'm doing for some of these parts because I know that there is some color variation within colors that are quite similar, and in order to prevent my eyes from being fooled by this resemblance, I try to squint and therefore simplify what is going on in order to have a better guide, a visual guide for where the differences start and stop, and then I can work out the details later on. Do we leave it? Yes, we cannot go quite as light within this area, so here I need to change the color on my brush again and go for some cooler grays. So I'm picking out the cool gray, but it has such a distinct bluish undertone that depending to what color this color sits next to, it could be mistaken for a steely blue. Never mind. So the cool gray mixed in with I need to make it a little bit more neutral, so I will pick up the warm gray and mix them all together and get a very interesting, very neutral gray color, but which is still more nuanced than if you mixed black and white together. And this is what we will use for creating some highlights in the little pebbles here, because they are distinctly more grayish or more cool in the undertone than the stones everywhere else in here. Also, I'm starting to question my choice of brush. I might pick up something of a more round brush maybe. So here the puddle is very interesting. There are so many colors mixed together, so many different nuances. This puddle of earth, of very wet earth underneath the stones, is passing on from warm tone grays to cool tone grays, and it really is the most interesting thing that it's created. I love it. And in order to create some continuity, we will try to take this color up the path. I believe we can take it up there, mix it a bit into the underlying color here, bring it in a little bit here. You do not want to have a exact line going from north to south, but just create some variation in the color in order to make the road complicated and more interesting and full of different pebbles and stones. You suggest them through color rather than through exact shape. I believe this is what makes it much more interesting to paint and much more interesting to look at than if you just had taken up a very precise brush in order to draw in the outlines of the stones. I like to create texture through a different variation in color rather than form. But once again, this is a very personal approach. It is sharing my personal artistic practices, and if you like the way that I'm creating things, I'm sharing this with you. This is how you will achieve the effect. I might take it up here a little bit, because the whole of the road really is a bit more cool toned than what I made it look like so far. We need to really change that. Once again, you see what I'm doing? These are very loose brush strokes. Sometimes you have more paint on the brushes, sometimes less. I'm deliberately not very precise about it. I'm building up texture. I feel like that this grey really goes over on the other side of the path as well, and it's mixing into here quite a bit. Okay, unifying the whole a little bit. There you go. This already looks much better than where we've started. We have a few stones here that are more cool toned and more greyish, and they are mostly here in this bottom corner area. I feel like this is where I'd stop with this color. Now I'm making a second correction to my initial color palette, adding in pale ochre, because I feel like some highlights in the stones are really quite bright and quite yellowish. And I believe that were I to brighten up the warm grey, I would not get that distinct yellowish undertone. Were I to mix in the Italian earth with some white, I would not have something as bright and punchy. So I believe that pale ochre would be the best solution here. So once again, I'm still using the same brush because I do want to have a slightly muddy color. And now we can establish some of those little highlights. Now, there we go. I don't know whether the camera is able to pick up how much brighter and punchier this color is than the previous mix of brown ochre and the warm grey, but let me tell you, the difference is real and it is there, and you definitely can pick it up on canvas. By the way, I should add in some brighter grasses as well, but this is maybe for another video where we will tie everything together in a nice way. So we have some really bright spots here, 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 not in the grey, but next to it. Something here, here, here. And now maybe get into some detail here, because we do have an awful lot of small pebbles in here and we will need to rework them a bit. Detail out the stones a bit more, give them more character where you see that they do have. Here we have some grasses leaning into the stones. Here we have one really bright stone. And there. Once again, we will fix the grasses at a later stage when we will fix all the details, but I do want to get some semi-transparent movement of this color in here to create a base to work off of the next time. This is a little bit of speckled stone, so we have a bit of a highlight. Now what we're left with doing is adding in some different toned highlights. So maybe something of a white further away on the path, because I believe that this part really is much lighter than what we actually have here, and maybe some of the stones here as well. We need to have some variations on the brownish undertones and speckle some highlights all around in here. And then I believe what I would do is go in with some brown again and paint in some outlines again. I know this is not the classical approach to it, so let's take up a little bit of white, mix it in with our neutral gray that we obtained by mixing in the cool and the warm gray. And you see where I started out, the white is quite bright and light and really, well, as vibrant as white can be, right? And the further I go down here, it mixes in with the previously existing color and it somehow becomes less white. And this is exactly the same effect that we are having in the photograph, because the light hits the wet stones far away at an angle where it appears to be really, really bright, and this is less and less true the nearer you come to our figure here into the foreground. And this is exactly what we are doing also with our brushwork. Now this is maybe a bit bright, I went a bit overboard here, so I'm going over with my finger again. I will fade out and mix the color. I will take up a bit of black in order to dull this color. We have some here in the foreground, you see. And a lot here in the middle ground, so a little bit more here. And especially here we have it quite a lot from what I'm seeing. I hope you see the same thing as me. Otherwise this really would not have any sense for you. Right. Here we go. This leans over a bit onto the path as well. Now we have got a few stones in here that are very grey undertoned. You see, once again, I believe that this mixture between the different tones, the cooler and the warmer tones, really makes this area work out, I believe. Wait until the outlines of the stones are back there and we have a little bit more definition and it will all come together again. But I believe that color-wise at least, this is starting to look quite animated and quite realistic and more complex, you know, than what we initially started out with. Because this area takes up quite a bit of space in the painting, right? So you do want to give it a bit of interest, right? Although it is just barren land and, you know, rocky road, which is not all that aesthetically pleasing, but by making it textured and complex, it brings back some life into it and some interest for you as well as the painter to work on it, to see it come together and not just, you know, spend your time and a whole afternoon drawing in the outlines. I have some grey in here, but we will have definitely to darken up this stone. I might have been a bit optimistic here. Okay, with some greys, there we have them. Let's speckle in a few in here and maybe a few there. And bring in some grey in here, because this is where I can definitely make it out in the photograph as well. Here. Okay. Now moving on to the right. Do you know what? Maybe, yeah, maybe here the outlines. Once again, I try to have a really dispersed brush stroke, no precise line here because it is rugged. So I believe that our brush strokes need to reflect that. I will just continue maybe here a little bit more, and it darkens somewhat in here on the outlines of the painting. I don't know if I would have gone in quite as dark as I just did. This was me being a bit too chaotic, but nothing we can't fix, right? This is after all oil colors. This is our greatest advantage. It is a pain that the colors do not dry as quickly as acrylics, but if you have to have some adjustments to make, you can absolutely do it. This is the upside. So we need to darken in the bits on the bottom here. So we had some bits of grey in here as well. And we do need to bring back our black, mix in with the brown, because it's not a bluish undertone in the shadows here, but our usual brown one. So I believe this is a bit better. Let's add some texture in here, because this appears too much of a uniform spot here. We need to change that and give it back some interest and some texture. Maybe I'll just switch brushes. I would go for something like that. A Kolinsky 2/0. So a very small, fine brush that I will be able to put some details in. And by the way, I will not do that uniformly around each one, and I'm not going for a very organized look here once again, so I will add some outlines in some places. I won't do that in other places. We are just adding in some of the definition that we lost when making some of the stones happen, so we need to bring them back a little bit, but not overall, not in the same way everywhere, and we cannot have the same focus everywhere on every type of stone. So somewhere we will just have some very fine brush strokes crisscrossing over in order to make you feel those little very, very small stones really. And somewhere we will have a much more detailed and established line. For instance, here we need to paint over once again because it became a bit too flat, you see. Okay, unfortunately the card was full, so I got cut off and I've actually no idea when exactly it stopped recording, so I'm terribly sorry if there's a bit missing from what I did to what you can see now on the easel. I'm continuing with the adding in of some more outlines on the different stones and bringing back some of the definition that we have lost. I'm tempted to switch the brushes again, but I will resist this temptation because you should not blame your tools for your own shortcomings. So I'll try to maintain more color on my brush. So there's a bit on the left here where we have a bit more, well, we have some smaller stones, right? And I'm under the impression that, and this is a bit where we can make out a bit of individual stones, so to speak, through the outline. And this is what I've chosen to accentuate this bit. And yeah, I think I will switch to another brush which is maybe a bit shorter because I want to smudge it out and to sculpt it a bit more. I will go into a bit of a lighter iteration of this shade here and see what we can do. We have quite a lot of detail going on in the foreground, of course, which is logical because we more easily make out what is happening in the front. So of course we would get more details here. Mind you, if once the color is dried down, I find that the outlines are a bit too harsh and that the black was not the best choice and that I'd rather have something more muted for the details. I can always glaze over in order to make them less loud, but this would also mean that I would definitely lose the details because I would lose contrast. but it would be a solution were I dissatisfied with the result once everything dried. And I feel like we have lost a bit of the definition here in the foreground. Now we are basically doing the same thing in here. Now I have to be mindful about not smudging out too much here where the paint obviously is still wet, because this would defeat the purpose of adding in some details. So we have to be careful of actually adding in details and not smudging everything out and deleting the details that we are so eager to get in. Okay, now what we can do is go back and pick up some of the lighter colors. I would say that we would have to put some in here. And this really is where the contrast is the strongest between the small stones, I believe, and the dark shadows. So we have to really go about small flecks. And let it leap over into the road, of course. Now we have some dried out grasses. Once again, we will fix that a bit later in the process, when we will need to bring everything together. So there will be one last video, I believe, and one last session dedicated to this painting, where we will concentrate on smaller details that will make this painting look more cohesive, because we will not work on certain areas, but on the whole of the painting, bringing it all together. So here we go. Now I'm going back into those cooler tones for the grey, because I believe that this bottom right corner has turned out to be really very heavy in the warmer tones, and that we've lost some of the cooler stones. This might be just about enough. Now, do we have the same problem on the left? Less so, I believe, but still we could make it more interesting by sneaking in some more greys, or cool tone greys, I will specify. Maybe slightly lighter tones. See, I'm going over those blacks that I believe were maybe a bit too much of a contrast here, and I will put the grey on top of it, and this way lessen the effect. But keeping some of it, you know. I did not annihilate what we did here previously. I've just decreased the contrast ever so slightly by reducing on the darker bits here. Smudging out the black ever so slightly. Actually, what I might do is having more horizontal lines here and less of a fleck situation, because I believe that we have to shape the road a bit more here. Then we bring back some of the greys in here, just ever so slightly. There are some, especially on the left side of the path. There we go, then it crosses over to the right side here. And a bit here on the left. Once again, we will certainly, go over the shadows here, because it's not as stark as that. We need to minimize a little bit what we did here. So that it's not as monolithic of a shadow. That was an unfortunate way of bringing it in, but as you can see, even if you are mistaken in your initial assertion, you can easily fix the mistakes, and nothing is ever set in stone with oil paintings. You can always go back on what you've decided to do. It's very, very forgiving. And maybe we can add some details in here as well, and play a bit more with the stones in the shadows without destroying the shadows. Breaking up a bit more of this shadow here. I will pick up some even brighter greys in order to brighten this area here just a little bit. In order to hint to some traces on the road. And once again, squinting your eyes helps seeing where we can add some of those glistening wet stones on the road. I believe that we have some more here on the bottom right. Okay. Also, I believe that this is where we have a bit more color than on the other side. So, do I dare bringing in some red tones without making it too much of a color focus, but I think we would have some more interesting shadows if I were to go over with this reddish brown here. And we have some of it in here, in there, and we could even get out a bit of an orange. I'll take some Indian yellow to begin with, and I dip my brush ever so slightly in the paint, and then I will really accentuate just maybe one or two stones in this way. Do you see how that gave it a bit more life instantly? Just one bit that is quite yellow here on the other side as well, maybe two, let's see. Here and here. I would not go further than that. Maybe just a bit here. And here we have a yellowish undertone within the stone. All right, now the orange. Let's go for a cadmium yellow dark that we will blend in with some ochre or Italian earth maybe. And let's put it here. I need it to be more red than that, so we are mixing in another cadmium red light that we will tame ever so slightly with the Italian earth. We don't need a lot because it would not look natural. We just need some small spots that look the part. Actually, while I'm at it, this is the exact color in the grasses. I know it's not about the grasses, this video, right? And we will definitely get back to the grasses in the next video, but I had the exact perfectly matched shade to the stones and I needed to get it on the canvas while I'm remembering it. I'm so sorry. This has nothing to do with our topic here, but let's do it anyway, because this will allow us to bring everything together. And we do not really have it on the other side, do we? Well, it's more of a reddish brown. We can try to mix in some burnt sienna into this color, and this way we might be able to have something for the right part of our painting as well. Yes, I believe this could work. Here, this is nearly already too bright. Some Sennelier brown within this, maybe, to have the right undertone, but to dullien it down just ever so slightly to blend it in. Yes, this is perfect. This is perfect. Once again, I'm sorry, this is not what this video is about, but I'm happy to have seen this and to have had the right shade on my easel at the right moment, so I will absolutely jump on the occasion to bring it all together in this way. Now, if we are so inclined, we could take the Indian yellow hue, mix it with pale ochre, and then blend out these dried grasses, because they do get much lighter at their end, right? So while I'm at it, I might just as well do that. This would be one less thing for me to do next time around when I will work on this. This is a bit unfortunate that it went on so thick, but once again, nothing that we can't correct. Also, always keep in mind that whatever you feel might be too bright at the moment when you're applying the paint on your canvas. Just remember that with time, when it dries down, it necessarily always calms down and settles in and will never stay as vibrant as you're seeing the colors in the moment of application. It won't stay as bright. So you have to anticipate that and in a way over apply or compensate, because if you want something that is ever so slightly lively and bright, you need to go over the top just a bit in order to still have some effect when the color will dry down. So what now feels like maybe a bit over the top will be just right in a week or so when the color has dried down. Oops. Okay. And now we are about done, I believe. We'll not take it any further here. This is all the color that we will need to put in, I believe, in the road. The last thing that we might consider doing would be taking some brown ochre and having something of a more greenish undertone in the middle ground. For instance, here, just a little bit here, and maybe here, right in this area a bit. Maybe and I believe that we are now officially done with the rocky road on this painting. So this is what it looks like. I'll try to zoom in and bring you closer to the canvas in that way, although you are supposed to look at it from a certain distance, right? But this is in order to give you an idea of into how much detail we ended up going without going for a photorealistic look. So we've created texture through contrast and through color contrast, so through contrast between light, dark and middle gray areas, and also through the contrast between warmer and cooler undertones in the grayish color. This is what allowed us to create interest, texture, detail in creating something that is believable, that is interesting, and that feels right for the atmosphere of this painting. And that's it for today, guys. I'm so grateful that you tuned in and that this little video might have been of interest to you. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you in my next video very soon, where we will certainly be doing those finishing touches that I've talked about in the beginning of this video. Until then, have a lovely morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Cheers guys, have a good one. Bye.